Hi everyone, it's Martin speaking here. Welcome to the first of a five-part series of disability webinars with Scope and myself. I hope you've all been able to log on using the technology okay. There's still a few of you logging on at the moment, so I'll take it a bit slower to begin with so everyone can log on and settle in and everything like that. I hope you've been able to familiarise yourself with the technology already as well. You should be able to see what's on my screen. So at the moment I've got the opening slide with the Sunny Days logo and the Scope logo, and as I then change through that you'll be able to see exactly what's happening on my screen, and obviously you can hear me chatting away live, so that's the way it works. For some that might have expected to see a live video of me, that's not quite how the software works, but you can get a lot more out of it because there's the visual aspects of the computer, and then I can still explain things and talk you through it all. Also there's a chat box as well for you to use, so I'm going to present for about 40 minutes and then there'll be a time at the end, which I think from experience of the other webinars that I've done has been the most valuable part to the attendants. And so what you can do is, as I'm talking, you can write your questions so you don't forget it, and then at the end, if there's other questions you have, you can just type them in that chat box and I'll then go through them and hopefully be able to answer them okay for you. So I think we'll press on, take you to the first slide. So for those that haven't come across who I am, that's a very cheesy picture of me there. In fact, that was taken in the Scope head office, as you may have picked up through the blog and the communications. I used to work for Scope for 5 years outside of straight after university, and left a couple of months ago to start up using new media and working on webinars and hopefully in the future e-courses as well. But absolutely happy and been able to work with Scope beyond that and in partnership. So that's what that photo was taken anyway. So just sort of a little general introduction. Personal experiences that I have are, I have spinal muscular atrophy, which is a genetic disability since birth. So I use an electric wheelchair and I have to use a hoist to get lifted everywhere, and I have 24/7 care through direct payments. And obviously we'll touch upon some of those things throughout, if not this webinar, throughout the later webinars in the series. I have a master's degree. I got that at Coventry University, finished about 5 years ago, as I mentioned. I now live independently in London with my care team. I have a pretty hectic social life, so I'll give you the blog details later, but I try and write an article or two every week so that people can kind of see the real living side of being disabled, and that obviously should and has to include having a good time as much as work or education and the fundamental things that we also need to get through and sort out as well. World traveller, so I'm actually off to New York next week for I believe a well-deserved holiday. It's been a busy 2.5 months and there's a couple of work things out there as well, but on the whole I'm looking to just have a bit of a chill, and then lots more cool plans for life, as everyone should have. I think we all should have big ambitions and things, goals that we try to work towards, and I'm no different. And then in terms of the professional experiences, as we'll touch in a fortnight's time on the teenage years, I did some work experience that was very much a sort of voluntary thing during the summer holidays when I was at university, and the key to that was to boost the CV up a little bit and just sort of get things moving before I actually had even studied. And then beyond university, I mainly worked in the fundraising department for Scope. I also did a train the trainer course where I helped roll out diversity training to internal staff members, and then just through being at Scope and all the great work that they do, I helped out a bit with some of the campaigning and the PR and did a lot of research through one of my roles in fundraising as well. So had quite a good exposure to lots of different parts of the disability world professionally. Also a freelance journalist. I've done a few articles for Disability Now and currently running an online magazine called Disability Horizons. There'll be details of that later if any of you want to check that one out. I've also worked on personalisation, so for those of you that don't know the actual sort of terminology of personalisation, that's to do with where the council give the individual person with a disability a budget, and they're able to then spend that on the different services that they need to see to the different aspects of being disabled. So the biggest example of that really is direct payments and the way that I'm able to pay individual people to carry out my care, but I'm in control of how far the budget will go and what type of person that I want to recruit. And then obviously I have the independence and flexibility of when to get up in the morning, and if I want to spontaneously go out and see friends, I'm not relying on agencies who come in at particular times. So again, that's probably later on in the series where we'll talk more about that, and being broadly parents of a disabled young person, that sort of things that you maybe want to know about but aren't going to be as sort of necessary for a little while yet. And as I've sort of touched upon, social media and new media, so using things like the webinars here and being able to disseminate helpful information to disabled people in different mediums. So the present day is that I'm running my own social enterprise, and I'm aiming to change the world for disabled people, and using social and new media to do that. So sort of combining all the above of personal and professional experiences. So that's a little introduction to who I am, the guy chatting away on the other end of the internet to you. So we'll move on the slide. So as you saw when you signed up for this, these are your outcomes. So to have an understanding of the importance of a child's firsts. So whether that's the first day at school and the first friend's party and all the other firsts that every individual should and must go through. But then obviously we'll go into a little bit more around inclusion, so exploring inclusion versus having the right support in place. I think overall it should be absolutely possible to be included within a more mainstream setting, but to have the right support. But I know, especially from the work I did at Scope, that sometimes an individual's impairment is such that the right support can only be out of mainstream, and that's obviously right for that individual. So this isn't looking at what's right or wrong or my overall opinion, it's just to sort of explore the different aspects, and hopefully that you guys can apply that to your situation as well. And then we'll look at when and how to seek expert help and assistive equipment, and just a general realisation really that you're not alone, and that your child can excel and you can enable that. And also, as I mentioned, being disabled since birth, I'll be able to touch upon a couple of personal experiences as well, and I've got a couple of quotes from other parents too, sort of give a bit of advice to yourselves. And yeah, just that general sentiment really that there are lots of other people in the same boat as you, and there can always be positive outcomes. So what we're actually going to cover here, so we're going to look at an introduction to the disability diamond theory. This is a theory that I've kind of created, having written blogs and been running the webinars and trying to work out how to more formally pull together the different things that I've lived and learned, and that I know from talking to lots of other disabled people who are friends and broader sort of disabled people that I've interacted with on the internet through my blog. So I've been able to put it into a bit of a semi-theory, and I've written an ebook on that which came out earlier this week. So I'll talk you quickly through what that theory is, but then obviously how this theory works and applies to the topic of why we're all here and sort of being a parent of a disabled child. And then obviously to consider the barriers that are relevant to you, and hopefully to find some solutions and strategies around education and socialising. And then, as I said at the end, there'll be the question and answer session where you can ask specifics on what I've talked about, whether it's to clarify something or something I haven't mentioned, and that's that can take as long as we need it to, and I'm happy to answer any sorts of questions there. So here is the disability diamond theory. So trying to explain it to you in the easiest way, I think if you look on the actual diagram on the left-hand side, we've got almost like the life stages. So it starts with parents of a disabled young person, then the teenage years, then independent living, which generally would be the sort of transitional years from childhood to adulthood. But there are lots of disabled adults that still maybe need some of the goals across there to be fulfilled or even just improved, the way that they access that. And then finally, the tip of the diamond is I've called life fulfillment and adventure. And then obviously as you go up each part of the life stage, there's sort of mini goals within that. So the two that obviously I've already mentioned we're going to be looking at are education and social inclusion. And then likewise with the teenage years, it's education, social inclusion, but also starting to look at the world of work. And then independent living, I feel overall from, as I say, general experiences and talking to other people, that the four key areas are employment, housing, equipment. Excuse the spelling mistake on equipment. The new diagram in the book has been corrected. This was from a previous slide. Equipment and transport, and then personal care, where one of the webinars I run is actually Independent Living Part 2. That's all about personal care, because with recruiting PAs and being able to run a care team and paying all of the necessary taxes, there's a lot sort of involved in that part. So that's a webinar in itself. But I think really the overall point to make is that all of these are a platform and a foundation that if all of those goals can be achieved and overcome, then it enables an individual in their, generally in life, to access career progression. So it's not just to have a job, it's to actually have a bigger aspiration of a job that is fulfilling and you enjoy, and you can, progress and feel like you're achieving things within your work. Obviously access and leisure, so that would be catching up with friends and going for coffee and the cinema and those types of everyday leisure things. And obviously adventure and travel too. So for anyone that's come across the blog, as I mentioned, I do a fair bit of travelling, and also last summer my little bit of adventure was I managed to fly a plane that was all adapted for hand controls, which was pretty amazing. And I think also you can apply that to everyone's life. There's an element of getting the platform and the foundations, and then having things that are more fun and interesting to aim for, but still maintaining all those other parts below. And then you'll see on the right there is relationships, and while sort of especially chatting to my peer group, there's always the thing about entering relationships and getting married in the love sense, but really relationships are a lot more important or a lot bigger than just that part. It's all about the relationships you hold with your friend and your family and professionals, and across the board relationships define who we are. And so that's something that an individual should always be aware of, the relationships they have, and look after those too. So while we've actually got all of these goals, if you look to the left, there's an overarching philosophy, which again, it's probably something that I live by myself, but I think it is very applicable broadly to this theory as well, where it is to set aspirational goals. So even though someone has a disability, it shouldn't stop them from, aiming to get out there and do anything that someone without a disability would do. But then obviously to identify the barriers that stop them from doing that, and we'll touch upon barriers a little bit more later in the presentation. But, clearly, again, every person will have barriers in the way, but having a disability does pose a lot more barriers between the end result. So just to understand what the different aspects that are causing difficulties and challenges are is important. But then obviously to be able to break them down and find solutions, so that number 3, you can get out there and grab life. So in terms of, just to finish off the theory really, to find those actual solutions, there's 6 resources which I believe, are different mix and matches depending on the goal and the barriers that you would seek to use. And they are knowledge. So that's kind of just understanding, having the knowledge of what you want to aspire for. In your instance is what your child maybe would want to aspire to do. And that there's always a practicality around that, but equally, you should be able to have that knowledge of what's good to get out there and do it. But having the right mindset is so important, having a resilience to not give up, and knowing your child or yourself better than anyone else, and being positive and having a can-do attitude is so important. As we mentioned with relationships, people, whether they're friends, family or professionals, people are always so important for finding the solutions to overcome those barriers. Technology, so obviously wheelchairs and adaptive transport and all other types of assistive technology are vital, but then also how they're funded. So whenever somebody has a disability, they shouldn't really have to pay for the costs that relate to being disabled. And so trying to find the right funding streams and being able to pay for the technology or accessing the right people is vital. And then I've put lastly campaigns, and the reason why it's last is I think I've certainly had to have campaigns in terms of fundraising campaigns for my first ever wheelchair and campaigning with the secondary school to make it more accessible, and unfortunately they didn't do that, and I had to go to a school a little bit further away. So the outcome's never exactly as you hope, and there are always sort of different avenues to take, but I just believe that sometimes some people can find that campaigning is the main outlet to just get out there and change the world, when actually, in this day and age there is a lot better provision for disabled people, and it's a matter of trying to find those right resources to progress. And then when something is fundamentally wrong and incorrect, then obviously there's a need to campaign. So, and as it says at the bottom, you can download the ebook if you go to martinsibley.com and then /philosophy. It's a 20-page book that explains this in much more sort of breadth and detail, but that kind of gives us a good setting to continue on with this particular webinar. So as I said, we need to understand what the barriers are. So if you can see, there's 3 main types of barriers within the social model of disability. And for those of you who haven't come across it, it's just that essentially a person is disabled by the barriers that are unwittingly imposed by society. So that the actual medical condition is called the impairment, but the disability only comes from factors to do with society. And the 3 types are physical, attitudinal, and organisational or procedural, as I've called it here. And the way that I would describe it generally, sort of from my own situation, would be that being a wheelchair user, when there are a flight of steps to get up into a building, then I'm disabled. But if there's a ramp or a lift, then I'm not disabled, and that barrier is totally non-existent. And then equally with attitudes, the typical one really is trying to access, certainly in London, all of the buses have ramps on them, and they're electric ramps, so that physical access is very good. But there are many times where the driver decides that it's a bit of an issue to get the ramp out and finds it all a bit too difficult, and that sort of attitude of the driver can then disable a person. So with the right education and training, and a driver treating an individual who has a disability as a normal customer and trying to cater for their needs, then obviously they wouldn't be disabled. And then with procedural organisational, another example would be around employment. So when applying for a job, if there's maybe a test that would need to be taken for that, then, and the individual would take longer writing because of their disability, then the organisational and procedure aspect might allow them to have more time. So they're still tested for that job against everyone else on their ability to do the job, but their disability isn't sort of an issue, their impairment isn't an issue, and the organisational procedures don't disable them. So that kind of broadly explains what the 3 types of barriers are. And then putting that in the context of the early years, I've just listed a few that I would see in the early years of being a barrier. So physical, we've got access to building, as I already mentioned. Another one would be toilet facilities, so having an accessible loo and potentially with maybe a hoist or enough area for a wheelchair to get in. Additional space for physio, so I used to, at my primary school, use the staff room, so it was quite interesting. After lunchtime I'd be rolling around and there'd be various orange pips on the floor from where the teachers had dropped them on the floor earlier on in the day. So it wasn't perfect, but at least there was additional space for me to access my physio. And then unable to access the table or desk. So again, for example, I used to have to stand up in calipers all day long as part of my physio, and so there was a big wooden block that was put on the table, so I was able to sit with my peers and do my work, but just while I was stood up at a higher built-up block rather than not being able to reach down to the height of the table. So they would broadly be physical access barriers. And then attitudinal, obviously looking at school, there'd be maybe health and safety, whether that would, when we look at procedure, I've put sometimes health and safety will be an issue. And obviously that's a barrier that then needs to be overcome in a different way. But under attitude, I've put it more in the context that sometimes a teacher or someone of a professional status might see that there's a health and safety issue when actually there wouldn't be. And that comes back to you sort of understanding your child's needs and being able to advocate sort of that actually there isn't a health and safety and these are the reasons why. and also they would talk about things being too risky or too difficult, and again, that's sort of having a confidence to be able to advocate for your child's needs. And then obviously attitudes of individual staff members, so that would need to be a sort of training around the teaching staff and the learning support assistants to understand disability and certainly your individual child's needs, and of course peers as well, so that the other members of the class understand the needs of your child. But obviously these can all be different aspects and different barriers. And then finally, under procedure, I've already mentioned health and safety, and as we looked at earlier, there's the whole thing around funding for personal support as well. So that kind of wraps up broadly the three, certainly under the social model barriers. And then I've put at the bottom around the perception can be a barrier as well. So again, this would certainly apply to someone maybe as an adult who has a disability, where there's the usual worries of life, and then obviously the additional disability specific. And that, rightly or wrongly, can be a barrier, because I think that comes back to how if you perceive yourself as a disabled person and therefore everything's impossible or difficult and you should feel lucky to be just in any job and those types of vibes, then that's going to be a barrier to actually getting on and doing the things you'd want to do. So I think that would be applied likewise to a parent as well, that there will always be worries of having a disabled child, but they aren't really a lot different to a non-disabled person. There's just a few additional physical or otherwise barriers that are in the way. So just broadly to kind of have that confidence and the positivity and the can-do that we talked about before, and that as much as there will always be difficult things in the way, as I've alluded to personally, there were many things that were difficult and took a long while to overcome. There are lots of resources at your disposal to keep sticking at it, and you can get over it in the long run, and there will always be a positivity at the end from experience that I have had and from I've seen from other people as well. So just to make this a little bit more interactive and make sure you're all still awake there as well, I haven't actually run one of these before, so it's going to be a little interesting to see how the technology works, but there's a little poll that I've created, and the question is, which do you think poses the most barriers? And it's out of education. I've called it the second one community, so social settings and friends, but essentially that's social inclusion when we're looking at the diamond. So as that launches, if you can now all vote for which one of the two you believe that has the most barriers in the way for your and your child's sort of everyday life, really. Okay, interesting. They're coming in now. I don't know if you're able to actually see this as well, the results coming in. So while they're still moving around at the moment, it's looking like community, social settings and friends are the ones that are the most, with the most barriers. Just going to look at the audience view tab here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I assume you've all voted, so we'll close the poll and I can share that as well. Do excuse me, this is all very new for all of us, some of this technology, but there we go. So you can see the results there. I think it's a little bit smaller than anticipated. But yeah, essentially you've all, or the majority have said that social inclusion is the more difficult. And I think for those that have said education, I think maybe there's an aspect that it's more fundamentally important to access education in the first instance, because every child needs to be able to get to school and learn the right things to be able to progress, and then whether that's to just continually progress as an individual to where they should go, and then hopefully in the long run end up with maybe uni or maybe employment, whatever it might be. Education is the most fundamental, and there are definitely a lot of barriers there, but I know from general feedback that a lot of people say social inclusion is actually harder because it's a kind of softer barriers. It's more kind of people's perceptions rather than maybe just the physical access. I mean, I know that when I used to go over to friends' parties, if there were stairs to get in the house, that would make it a bit more difficult. But it's actually more about that friend or the friend's family or whatever it might be that are more open and comfortable with a disabled person and being sort of aware of their needs. And I think all I can say as a general, we'll move on to some of the solutions, but that's just something that has to come over time, and that by being very open and kind of confident about your child's disability and just being out there and kind of in the local community and going to local general events, that those barriers will come down. But I think maybe that's a slower burner for certain. So thank you for helping us to together to complete that poll. I'm glad that the technology seemed to work there. So that was all a good one. We'll crash on with the slides now. So as I'd sort of just alluded to, really, some solutions. And I think just to clarify, while I've had my personal impairment and my personal barriers and my personal achievements, it would be silly of me to suggest they would be the right method forward. Just hoping that by giving you the diamond theory and the sort of framework to work with, that then you can obviously apply it to your child's needs. So look at what they're likely to be able to achieve in an aspirational sense, what the barriers they're coming up against are, and then hopefully using some of the 6 resources that we've got up now to help find those solutions going forward. So really with knowledge, I think that's kind of, it's lots of different things. It's probably knowing who the right people to talk to are, and what the right technology is, and all those sorts of things as well. But it's sort of having that moment to just sit down and take stock and just think about what is the best outcome for your child, and what are the barriers and what are the solutions. And in knowing a little bit more broadly that context, it's probably easier to then digest what needs to be done and almost create, I suppose, a bit of a to-do list of different people to talk to, different websites to visit, different applications to fill out for funding. But that in a year or 2 or however long it may well take to actually reach that overall goal, that you are progressing and getting a bit closer every time you tick something off that to-do list. So the knowledge is all of it, really, and just sort of being aware of all of the different circumstances that you have. And as I said, with mindset, I think very much it's about positivity and can-do, because it's so easy when maybe doctors, when they diagnose your child, or just generally society, can have a feeling, well, someone has a disability, so they're not going to really be able to do much, and it would just be nice if they're able to go out and just be in the school and that'll do, kind of thing. So I think that positivity comes alongside aspirational. But even when things get quite tough, and they will for definite, just to always kind of keep smiling and keep on top of it and have that can-do attitude. And obviously the last part of mindset I've put there is problem solving, because really this is about coming up with creative and innovative solutions as well. To give a silly example, really, I've never been able to physically with my hands undo a can of Coke, but I realised that I could undo the drawer at my mum and dad's house to get a knife out, and by slipping the knife underneath the ring pull and then levering it, I was actually able to open the can of Coke by using the knife. And so again, that's that kind of thinking outside of the box. So I think it's always about encouraging your child to be independent where they can be, because it can be easy to always rely on other people. But also for yourself, when dealing with schools and social inclusion, is to always think about what is the problem and then what is the solution. So moving on to people, I think from my side, definitely family have been so key. I definitely give a lot of respect and love back to my mum and dad, who there were times I didn't want to go to the local secondary school because I had to travel quite far away, and my mum was basically as hard as it was for her, she made sure that I got out the door onto that bus and went to school. So there were times where my family had to be firm with me because it was right in the long run, and I suppose not always wrap me up in cotton wool and let me get out there and sort of do the things that needed to be done and learn, sort of take risks and learn from my own mistakes as well. But equally, I've always had so much love and support from my family, and they've always encouraged me to go out there and do all the things that I now do. And so I think that base point, family is absolutely fundamental. And then moving on to friendships, I did go to the local primary school and definitely having friendships from day one where the 4 or 5-year-olds that were in my class didn't really comprehend my disability. It was just so accepted, and I'm still friends with those guys today, and they're so open and chatty and understanding about all the different needs that I have. And so I think to encourage that to be instilled both from the disabled person but for the school to nurture that as well is so important. But I'd also include friendships, not just to be, say, with non-disabled or mainstream setting, but I know I benefited later in life from having disabled friends because obviously they understood the challenges that I was having, and it didn't make me feel like I was the only person going through those worries and concerns. So friendships are very important too, and obviously bouncing ideas around problems and solutions too. And then staff, so that would be more around a school educational setting, and we've touched upon, having the teacher and the learning support assistants and the head teacher on board and understanding the needs of your child and being very open and facilitating the support there is key. And then generally professionals, so having a good social worker and having them on side is very useful and helpful for the problem solving. And obviously charities such as Scope, who, whether they are actually running the school, but it could just be on their information, advice and support. If there's specific problems that you're having, they'll be able to listen to the individual situation and help find an answer from their networks and their great knowledge and experience too. So technology, we've mentioned when we went through the diamond theory, but that would obviously be having hoists at school or certain other equipment, like maybe social inclusion could be going away for a weekend. So if you're going to a hotel, then there's maybe other ways you can look at without having to take a hoist, such there's something called a transit seat, which is a little bit like a sling that goes on the hoist, but it can be lifted with 2 people to actually lift the person in that transit seat. But then, also to know how to get to that technology or equipment and where to find it. So that would be, again, about tapping back into professionals such as social worker and charities such as Skype. And then we move on to funding, so how to fund all of that. I said disability should not cost, but knowing where and who can help. So certainly at school there's a special educational needs statement. So that would be a vital part, would be ensuring that the school and any other professionals from the local council are, getting the right level of funding to support your child. So I think always, ask for the absolute maximum. And I know we're in difficult climates at the moment with the economy and the cuts, and so this is, I suppose, easier said than done, but, there are legal baselines of every disabled person should have the right level of support, and certainly in education that should always be facilitated. But also you could look into funding for maybe some additional support around social settings as well. So, I think it's very important that you can enjoy your child for who they are and not always around the care side. I know since I've become an adult and lived independently, which was, as I said, a very difficult step to have taken before. I'm not saying I'll go through that more in later webinars, but it's been great now that when I go back to visit my parents, I have my carers doing my care for me, but I'm able to just sit and chat with mum and dad as mum and dad, and there's no reason sometimes that can't happen even as a child, and have agencies and carers coming in to support your child, but while you're out as a family in a social setting. And I know having a younger sister who isn't disabled, there's obviously things to juggle around that as well, so to have a bit more time with other siblings as well. And then obviously campaigns, so that again would be depending on your particular situation, but it could be asking the funding for the SEN to be improved, or it could be funding campaign for fundraising for a new wheelchair, or all the different types of things that what apply to your situation, but there might well be times for campaigns. So I've sort of touched upon a few bits and bobs throughout personal experiences as we've gone through the whole slides. I think really from my absolute personal perspective, inclusion was massively important. The 2 little pictures there, one's me rocking out on a guitar at age, God knows what, 2 or 3 probably, but the other one is a newspaper cutting. You can see I'm in a turbo wheelchair, which used to go up and down. So I was able to go down, as you can see in that picture, and push a football along and sit on the carpet with my other friends during story time. But it would also go up as well. So when we were in the playground, I could be up at that height too. And that wheelchair was totally funded by the local community. And I think really because when I said inclusion is important, it was more because I was able to access the right level of education and the curriculum that was right for me was one aspect. But being in the local school, the local village, there was a definite knock-on effect and consequence that I was then more likely to be invited to different parties and any other social settings that were going on. And then because I was more visible generally in the community, when we did have to run the campaign for the wheelchair, the community just rallied around and was so helpful in running different bike rides and sponsored runs and a community fete, and that all, in the long run enabled me to have that mobility and that independence. So again, while I know sometimes the inclusion thing isn't the absolute right for an individual, it does illustrate the ideology and maybe something to strive for because of those consequences. So it's something to bear in mind. But as much as being in the local school and having the right level of education was important, having the right resources and support was paramount too, as I put on point 2 there. So at the local village school, at primary school, I always had one teaching assistant next to me who would do my physio and help me with going to the toilet and all the personal care that I needed. And that would also enable me to go on school trips and, just to generally be an active member of the class, which was brilliant. But then, as I said, moving on to secondary school, the local school wasn't accessible. I know my mum and dad fought for about a year to have that changed. But the amount of work and money that would have needed to go into it was such that the school just couldn't justify that being allowed. Excuse me, I'm getting a frog in my throat. Have a sip of water. So in the end I wasn't able to access the local secondary school and be as included, and I went off on the bus, as I told you, with 3 or 4 other wheelchair users to the school half an hour away. But having said that, I was then in a mainstream setting. I was the only wheelchair user in my class, so I was still included in that sense. But equally, there was a whole unit in the school that supported probably the 20 or so special needs students. And there it was amazing because there was a physio team of TAs who would all be able to do my physio and again help me go to the toilet and get my lunch, and also help with some of the other things like PE would be more difficult. So while I did play badminton sometimes with my other friends, there was other times where it was better to actually join in with the, it was called the pavilion, but where the special needs unit was, and go swimming where they had like a warm pool and all of the right hoists and stuff. So I think it's very much a balance of the two. And also because there were other disabled students, as I said earlier, I was very much able to bounce off of other people and understand I wasn't alone and talk about my worries and fears with other disabled people. So I think, those first 2 are to kind of say go for inclusion, but only if the right support can underpin that. And then the end result, it should be a positive. And then therefore it's all about taking the lead. So that comes back to mindset and about positivity. But while you should always bounce ideas with friends, family and professionals, you're the expert on your child and you know what their limitations and what their needs are. So it's kind of project management and making all the different things come together for the right outcome for your child. And as we said, mindset is key. And the last little one I put is always smile and rock on, because I think that's one of the most important things in life. So here we've got what other parents have said. So first of all, Caroline, who is a friend of mine, like she's a little bit younger, but her mum is Caroline, and my friend Jessica has a disability as well. And Caroline said, I think one of the key areas for parents is in challenging information given to them and not accepting advice from professionals as always the best advice. The mantra is, if it doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. Also, don't let them cite health and safety as a barrier to doing things. The role of health and safety is to reduce risk, not eradicate it. Everyone encounters risk every day. disabled people are not different. Example, school trips and sports, etc. And that sort of comes back to what I said earlier, really, about being able to go out there and, make mistakes and take risks the way anyone would, but they're not being put in such a compromising situation. So it's, again, very much about that balancing act, but that, Caroline's point is that health and safety should never be a reason to stop your child from doing what they rightly should do. I also had a little word with my mum, who, as you can tell, is a big part of everything that I now get on and do and believe in. And she said that when you are blessed with a disabled child, always look for the positivity of what they can do and not what they can't. Life can be challenging, many hoops to go through and hurdles to jump. You will normally find a way around it, and a cheerful disposition does help. And the reason I put my Auntie Julie, without this being too much of a family affair, is actually my Auntie Julie has two boys, who are obviously my cousins. One is profoundly deaf and the other has Down syndrome. So between me and my two cousins, we've got a fair spectrum of different impairments going on. And Julie said that many professionals will give advice based on their study of a condition, but everyone is an individual, and as a parent, you know your child and what they are capable of. Never say can't, always say can try. So I think that's starting to bring us towards the end now. Oh, yeah. So I put why do it? Well, that's a picture of me on my master's graduation day with my sister and my mum and my dad. And really, that isn't the only reason why to do it, but that, shows that I, having a very severe impairment, in terms of, for those that don't know, spinal muscular atrophy, physically there's very little I can actually do for myself. But in having all those platforms we've talked about on the Diamond Theory, I was actually able to access the local school and then go on to university and do well in my education, but also, without going into all the details, I had a very good time socially at university as well. So, I hope that's some form of inspiration and the kind of reality that anything can be possible. So thank you for listening. As I say, there's my contact details going down here. So if afterwards you want to get back in contact, then by all means do. We've also got the next webinar in 2 weeks on the teenager, so I hope you can join that. But we've still got 15 minutes to answer questions that you might have. So if I just open up the question box. Okay, there's a couple of people have been writing about the actual poll. I think in the end it was oh no, I didn't realise that. It sounds like the poll is still on. Oh, I'm ever so sorry. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to be able to do. You've heard everything I've just been saying. I'll quickly run you back just to show you the slides, and I'll send you the slides afterwards. But having done that poll, it's obviously then stops you seeing the right slides afterwards. Okay, so these were the barriers which we talked about. These were the solutions which I talked you through in quite a lot of detail. So that's just, I literally went through those 6 points anyway. These were the two pictures. So again, I taught you through this in a lot of depth, but that was the cheesy photo that was at the top right, with me rocking out on my guitar, and then the newspaper cutting. And then I just read out what parents have said. So again, you would have heard that. And then that was the picture of my graduation day with my mum, my dad and my sister. So sincere apologies you didn't get to see those last few slides, but I think hopefully the way I explained it, you would have got the exact sentiments I was trying to put across anyway. And as I said, thank you for listening there. So these are my details. God, that was a bit of annoying, wasn't it, with the poll? But we are now back on track. So if you now, as some of you have already worked out with the chat box, to trying to desperately tell me that the poll still hadn't disappeared, but by all means, write away on some questions that you have. So as I said earlier, whether you want me to clarify any of the things I've talked through, or talk about what exactly sort of maybe to help with some of your situations, there might be a particular question that you've got. I'm not sure how to apply the Diamond Theory to that, but have a quick think about sort of digesting everything I've talked about, and then also type away on some questions. I'm just going to have a quick sip of water if you don't mind. Okay, brilliant. We've got a couple coming in now. I just hope my voice holds out for the next 10-15 minutes. I delivered another webinar earlier this afternoon for a council, so I think my voice is a bit on the way out now, but I should be fine for the next 10. So we've got 2 questions have come in so far, but by all means, even just share your thoughts on it, whether it might not be an actual question, there might just be a bit of feedback to give on what you've observed or heard. What I was going to say as well is if you want it to remain anonymous, let me know, but the way I treat this is like if we were actually in a room, then you'd all be able to sort of talk to each other as well. And if you do want to share any of your details with other parents, let me know if there's any element of sort of networking. I'm happy to facilitate that. But this is sort of confidential within, the group here. So we'll just sort of go through the questions one at a time. So the first one is, I have a 4-year-old with cerebral palsy and I'm worried about what her life would be like after leaving school. Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk to my mum and dad, I'm sure they were very, very worried about what I would do after school, because I think while there are difficult things that go on in the school years, there is a little bit of a bubble and a comfort with all of the teachers and the general staff. So I think there's absolutely more reason there could be a worry about what happens after, whether that be around employment or independent living. As I say, some of the webinars later in the series are going to go into how I and other people have actually overcome that. So if you want a little bit more assistance on how that might look practically, then by all means sign up for those later webinars. In terms of maybe write up into the box, Sherry, what the exact worries are, and I might be able to sort of try and help you a little bit more. But I think the fact that you are worried about that aspect is absolutely natural, and every other parent would feel very much the same as you. So Paul's saying, thanks Martin, easy to follow nevertheless. That's good to hear. What was the most difficult hurdle you found that you had to overcome while growing up? I think in the fortnight, when we look at the teenage years, I think that was the hardest. If you think of any individual in the teenage years, it's quite difficult. There's the hormones running wild, there's kind of working out who you are, who you want to become, can feel like the world's against you. And then I think when you have a disability, you have to try and learn to accept what that actually means for you, and that's difficult in its own right. And I think I touched upon on the diamond theory about relationships, but I think as a sort of 15, 16-year-old individual, certainly those things start to come into play. And I remember having a lot of fretful conversations with my mum and dad about whether a girl would ever love me and accept my disability and all those kind of things. So I think broadly the teenage years were very difficult, sort of trying to access the social inclusion part with what all my friends were up to when they were going clubbing. And so a lot of those things we'll talk about in a fortnight in more detail, but I think the teenage years were probably the hardest broad hurdle. But if you talk about specific barriers, probably social inclusion was the one that takes longer to solve and overcome. But, as I said, it is possible and it is doable. So Dawn's put, my child cannot talk and has cerebral palsy. Mainstream have no idea what to do. He attends a special school, but cognitively bright. Am I right sending him to a special school? And Dawn said that he's 5. And as I said earlier, it's very difficult for me to say categorically what is right and what is wrong, because I don't know all of the sort of exact levels of impairment and the exact sort of support and everything at the school. But I think, as we said, the idealistic side is inclusion. Certainly if cognitively a child is good, then you would want them to be able to access the right level of education. But if their support needs are so high that can't be facilitated, then going to the special school maybe has to be the right outcome. But then it would be really pushing hard, I would imagine, for that school to be able to facilitate them having the right level of education. So it's a balance of one or the other, and only you can know your gut instinct. But I suppose I'd also just say maybe with a generally fresh approach, just have a bit of a think about, what would it mean in mainstream? What would the different levels of support need to be? And are they genuinely too difficult to make that possible? Or is it just that, some of the staff, or maybe you haven't had the confidence to believe that it is doable when actually it might be? So I think only you can answer that, but, just have a really long, hard think about the pros and cons of both. But, in the end, the outcome won't be absolutely amazingly the right one in the ideological sense, but it's about hitting enough of the balances as we've talked about through this. And maybe, if special school is right, it might be about trying to work on social inclusion, but not via the school. You might sort of try and find some local social outlet that can harness that part as an idea anyway. So Alison put, great to hear about your friendships. Did you want to visit your friends without your parents at age 5? How do I go about getting an appropriate direct payment rate for PAs to do this? I think I had agency care coming in from about the age of 10 to help me bath or shower twice a week, to help mum and dad have a bit of time off and maybe spend time with my sister. But I think at 5, it was probably more within the realms of mum and dad coming with me. Having said that, I'm now 28, so direct payments didn't even exist when I was 5. If you want to look into it, I think just talk to your social worker and explain this is what you want to do, that if there would be once a month where your child would go to a friend's with a PA and the other sort of friend and their family are all very open and comfortable, then by all means talk to your social worker. But if not, it might just be as a sort of family outlet that you all go to another friend's house and the children can play together and the adults can chat, but maybe you are there to support. So again, it's that kind of what feels right to you. But if PA is the right route, then definitely I'd talk to your social worker and see what they can do to help you. Alison put, Dawn, my son is 5 with CP and can't speak. He gets 50 hours a week in mainstream and he uses an eye gaze device supplied by school. So there we go, yeah, that's exactly where I think Alison's supporting my theoretical comment that, that there should or could always be a way in mainstream. It just may be that it takes more funding and more personal support and more technology, but that's not to say that it's totally impossible either. So Sherry put, I feel that question. I had to find out what my daughter likes and shouted to get her accepted into social activities. The child tells you if they are happy in their way. I think they made the right choice for a specialist school. Keep in touch and inform with the school and make friends with other parents. So yeah, I think there's always a way of having a social outlet, even if special school is the right educational framework. So while we're toing and froing in a way here between whether it should be inclusive or special school, you're all feeding into me here that it will just depend on individual circumstance and what is right in your heart and in your mind. So only you can make those decisions, but definitely explore all avenues. And that was what I've put in the ebook really, is that, just always consider all the different avenues and even every couple of years review that and just constantly check that it's going the right way. Alison put, has Dawn heard of One Voice? Very good for communication. So I don't know if you have heard of that, Dawn, but Alison is suggesting to try and use One Voice. So I've not come across that specific one before. I know in fundraising at Scope I helped put in bids for some of the augmentative communication aids, but I don't remember the One Voice one, but it sounds good. So thank you for that, Alison. I hope that helps Dawn. And Dawn's just said, no, not heard of One Voice, but we'll Google it. So that's good. Dawn also put, thank you. What therapies do you think helped you? What do you think of conductive education? So with conductive education, I personally haven't used that before. So again, if anyone else watching has an opinion they want to share on that, by all means write it and I'll share it with everyone else. I know from when I worked at Scope, some of the schools they run do that. And so it's obviously it's about that kind of physical activity alongside learning as well. And I had a couple of friends my age that were sort of wary of, I think maybe it was painful at times, and that was one of their memories. But equally, it did leave their, body in better condition having done it. So I'll say if anyone else wants to share that. But on a personal, experiential level, that's not something I can actually kind of share with you really. But in terms of other therapies, certainly physiotherapy, absolutely swimming. I stopped doing swimming at the age of 18 because, as you'll probably find out, when your child gets to the transitional years and becomes an adult, a lot of the services kind of fall off a cliff. So as much as it is very difficult with a young disabled child getting used to all of the different challenges and the different solutions, believe me, there's a lot more funding and actual services that are out there, and they just seem to cease to exist when the child becomes an adult. And luckily, about 18 months ago, in my local pool, I found out they're doing disability swimming, and I felt so much better for doing that again, because, so I can't bear weight, I can hardly move at all, but to be in a pool and that weightlessness and being able to kick my legs around and stretch my joints is so important. And also, when I said about physio, I ended up with a curvature of my spine, and I had to have 2 metal rods put in my back when I was 15. But if I hadn't had my physiotherapy and done all my standing all day long in the class, I would have ended up actually having more trouble and having that operation done earlier. So yeah, I think definitely physio and swimming were big for me. Alison put www.one as in the number one voice.info. So that's obviously back to our earlier conversation. And she also put, we use the bow bath approach and they are fantastic. Not tried conductive. That's BOBATH, bow bath. So if any of you guys want to Google that, I'm sure you can read up about what the bow bath approach is. It's not something I've come across before. Wayne said we have a 3-year-old with CP and find conductive education really effective, as it is more of a holistic approach than just physio, but we have to pay for this ourselves. Okay. And then again, I think when we come back to absolute sort of specifics on funding and that sort of thing, definitely give Scope Response a call, because they'll be able to advise, especially when it's relating to cerebral palsy. They're very much the experts on that. So, if there's anyone having questions or concerns about funding or trying conductive education, all the things we're talking about, then definitely, go give Scope Response a call. I'm sure they'll be able to help you out. And obviously, as someone else said, just Google and have a read around on the internet as well. Paul, but our son Blake, who is 2.5 years old with quadriplegia, he goes for conductive education session once a week. When he went with mum or dad, he screamed the place down, but now we leave him for the session. He seems to get on with it a lot better. We have stuck with it, but many parents we speak to have given up on it because their children hated it or they found it a bit too industrial. One size fits all. I was going to say a couple of people have signed off, so if you do need to head, because it's about 8:30, then thank you very much for attending. I hope you got a lot out of it, and sorry for the issues with the poll. I'll carry on. There's a couple more coming in if you want to stay on, or if you have any other questions, I'm happy to stick around, but I'm just sort of letting you know if you need to head off, that's fine as well. So Alison put, great to see you in a turbo. My son has the new Snapdragon and he loves it. Oh wow, yeah, I haven't got a turbo anymore. I think it's more suitable for the children's years really, with the whole, I remember having all my friends sat on the back of the wheelchair and on the side of the wheelchair, and we used to go around the playground pretending it was a Formula One car and sort of getting quite imaginative with it. And I used to play football a lot too and go to the local leisure centre in the 5-a-side and tell the referee that I was actually going to be going in the area because I couldn't kick the ball hard. And then because I was able to get nearer the goal and deflect the ball in the net, I actually was the top scorer. So sometimes there can be benefits as well. Dawn saying, thank you for a great presentation. You have given me more hope for the future for my child. Oh, thank you, Dawn. That's really nice to hear, and best of luck. And as I've said also, do stay in contact. I hope if you want to follow the blog, do that, sign up, and you can watch some of the other general things I get up to, and also sign up to the other webinars as well. But I'm glad to hear this has been really helpful for you. Wayne's put, have you ever encountered discrimination against you because of your disability in everyday life? I'm not going to be silly and say no, because I'm sure I have. There's certainly been the whole bus driver story. There's definitely sort of discrimination there, and I'm sure there's certain elements around, with job and applying for jobs, and it's bound to happen. It's unfortunately still part of the world, but I think the mindset of being resilient and the can-do approach has always served me really, really well. And I think it's that kind of thing when an individual in a sort of social setting is funny, they're not worth knowing. But when someone is discriminatory in a more formal, structured way, whether it's at a school or in employment or other ways, that's where you maybe do have to learn to challenge it a little bit more. But yeah, I think absolutely I have been discriminated against, but I find a smile and a sense of humour is often the most disarming way as well. Sherry put, thank you very much. It was very informative. One more question. How did you deal with people staring? One look can spoil a good day off. Yes, yeah, staring too. I think I'm saying this a bit jokingly, but now I probably just think it's because they fancy me or something like that. But in all seriousness, it can be a bit annoying. I remember I went to Singapore and I was a sort of double minority, being in a wheelchair and being white, and the people in Singapore just literally would stop in the street and just stare. And I know my good friend who I run the magazine with, Shrin, he's originally from India, and he says when he's back in India, people just absolutely stare at him totally. So I think we're a little bit more subtle in the UK. But equally, yeah, when people do, I think it comes back to that, not always feeling that life is a campaign, because if every time you're in a pub or the cinema and someone stares and you want to change the world, it's going to, like you say, spoil a good day out. So I'd argue that if someone's very obvious or rude, you could make a jokey comment or let them know that you spotted them, but equally sometimes it is better just to turn the other cheek and be the better person. And Alison has put, hope to meet Dawn through one voice one day. So yeah, hopefully Alison and Dawn can link up. Wayne's put, thank you very much, very informative and engaging. Thank you very much for that feedback, Wayne. That's really good to hear. So I'm very sorry about the poll. I was so made up. And then actually, yeah, we had the poll up the whole time. And Lisa's saying that it was very helpful as well. So thank you for that, Lisa. We'll catch up soon. Okay, guys, well, I'm going to log off. It seems like the questions have stopped coming in. But as I said, feel free to email me anytime. And hopefully some of this has been helpful. So take care, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.